idolatry. Wherefore, because of that, God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up into vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use of that which into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. All right, so here again, he mentions their tendency to idolatry. They worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator. So I'm going to make an image. What am I going to make? I don't know. I think I'll make a golden calf. I think I'll fashion an image and make it look like a calf, okay? And I'm going to bow down and I'm going to worship that thing that I created, that image that I created. What would I be doing? I'd be worshiping and serving the creature, this calf or this image of a calf, more than the Creator who made the calf. It's so totally illogical, right? But God allowed them to do that. God gave them up. Or allowed them to go over to that. What was one of the other translations we mentioned last week? God let them go. I think instead of gave them up, it's more the idea he let them go. You know, one of the principles of God's relationship with man throughout all of time, all the way back to the Garden of Eden, one of the very basic principles of God's dealing with man is free moral agency. He's going to let you do what you want to do. Now, he has a will. He has a desire. He has what he wants you to do, and he's told you so. But he's not going to make you do that. He's going to leave you up to your own choices. And he did these people. God gave them up or gave them over. He allowed them to go deeper and deeper into their corruption and into their idolatrous worship. What happens is that things go worse and worse, right? When that process begins, you don't just, so I'm gonna do so much evil and then I'm gonna stop at that level right there. So I'm gonna allow myself to do this, this, and this, but when I get to that point right there, I will go no further. That doesn't happen, does it? So I go here and I get to that level, but then I keep escalating, right? And actually it almost becomes exponential. The corruption, the evil, the immorality, the departure from God escalates over time. It becomes more and more advanced, I guess we could say. Thoughts or comments, anybody? All right, now, get rid of some of these scribbles here. For this cause, because God gave them over and because they were following their own evil desires, God gave them up. Notice that's the same expression up there. He gave them up or he gave them over. He allowed them to go further into vile affections. Now, the next couple of verses, and we don't want to be too graphic in this mixed audience, but I'm going to tell you, there's not a more graphic description of the sin of homosexuality than this passage right here. You know, unfortunately, in our world, it becomes necessary for us to say, well, why are you against homosexuality? Now, are you homophobic? You got some kind of prejudice? You biased in some way? What's your big deal? Why can't they do what they want to do? Why can't homosexuals practice their preferences? You practice your preferences. You're a heterosexual person, and you're allowed certain avenues to express your human sexuality. Why can't a homosexual do that? What's the matter? You guys got a hang-up of some kind against this? Well, the answer to that is no, it's not a hang-up. We don't have a personal hang-up about it. We just understand what the will of God is about that. And he calls these practices vile affections, and then he goes into rather particulars about the sin of homosexuality. Women change the natural use to that which is against nature. Men, leaving the natural use of woman, burned their lust one toward another. Men working that which is unseemly. There's a real desire to normalize homosexual conduct. I know you're aware of that. It's so evident in our world, and sadly, this desire to normalize that kind of practice is really paying off for those who have the agenda of the homosexual part of our society. Used to be, and I'm talking just 25, 30 years ago, they used to estimate that 1% or less of the U.S. population was homosexual. It was always in that range, somewhere around 1% or less. Now, recent surveys are saying it may be as high as 10% of our people are engaged in homosexuality. Why is that? Well, it's because they have been very active in promoting this and trying to normalize it. It's not. You don't practice this, but it's not abnormal for other people to practice this. But the Word of God says this is against nature. This is not what's natural. Wade?
Do you think that legalization and promotion
It's got to help. I would say that's certainly a contributor, right? But it is. I think it is the kind of thing that this text is suggesting. It just keeps escalating, right? So if I, as Wade said, if I just decide I'm just going to view pornography, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to look at it, right? And so there's a certain level of satisfaction or gratification that comes from just looking at it, but that wears off in time. And then I got to take it to a higher level. And then at that level, I'm not satisfied any longer. I just got to keep escalating it and getting more and more involved in all kinds of sexual corruption. That's what's happening in our world, and I'm sure that pornography is a contributor to that. Gordon.
Greg, it's a learned affection. A lot of them will say, I'm born that way.
Yeah.
But, the real thing, it just keeps increasing because you have same sex parents raising children, and the children grow up in that, in that environment, and what are they going to think when they get old enough to make their choices?
Yeah.
It just keeps snowballing.
Exactly right. James?
in verse 26, in the New English Standard Version describes it as honorable passions. Society has changed what's honorable and not honorable. So much more easy to accept. Right?
Yeah.
So in reality, it's dishonorable. It's actually degrading oneself if you participate in it. Society normalizes it. It's so much easier to be acceptable from another.
Yeah. Exactly right.
You lose the battle in society, no longer considers it as a dishonor. So there's no penalty. There is penalty, but not in a societal standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes we talk about societal taboos. Certainly the societal taboo against homosexuality has been almost completely removed, right? There is no shame.
When Wayne went after, they had to get a room, single.
Two men couldn't stay in the same room. That's the way they are. That's not the way we are. Tom?
Well, it goes back to verse 18. God revealed the wrath, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. That sort of indicates there's consequences. You go through and do this, there's consequences. The world, and even the religious world, wants to take out that wrath of God. They want to take out the consequences. You can just go do what you want to do. That's okay. We're going to accept it. And there's no consequences to it. God says there's consequences. His wrath is poured out on it. And, Paul's going to go through and show them that, even with the Jewish people, there were time after time after time that God revealed his wrath against the people that practice these unrighteous things.
Yeah. It is not without consequence. men try to, as James was mentioning, men have tried to remove the societal consequence. And they have principally, but that doesn't remove all the consequence. And the wrath of God is against that. As we mentioned last week, I don't think that it's fair to say one sin is worse than another, or God hates one sin more than another. But I'm going to tell you, all through the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, it's clear that God hates homosexuality. I mean, I'm not saying that he hates it more than great sin that way, but there is no doubt about God's denunciation of the sin of homosexuality. Wade?
I know he puts out a thing every month or week what he's doing, and he was talking about homosexuality. You know, he's done some debates on it, and one of the things that he told me, or he said in the article, was that, you know, it's so hard to tell these people, even, you know, you want to love everybody, right? But it's so hard to tell these people that God compares this to like murder, like rape. He compares these things like very vile sins, and he puts them in the same category. And you have to express this. There's not the fact that he hates you.
Yeah.
It's just the fact that God has said that this is not what he wants, and he's classifying these sins all together.
I think you're exactly right. So again, not to be too graphic, but 26 and 27 are very explicit condemnations of the sin of homosexuality. And I would just have us all be ready, because increasingly we're asked to explain, why are you so opposed to homosexuality? And as we've been saying, we need to express our opposition to it is not a personal bias or prejudice. It's because the Bible condemns it, God condemns it, and souls are at stake because of this sin. Any sin, of course, souls are at stake because of any sin, but this is a sin that will damn men's souls to hell. Whit?
There's also a movement in our society toward feminization of men and masculinization of women, even without any sort of sexual connotation being brought into it at all. Like, my generation has seen it, I think, very heavily, because my whole life they were trying to influence us to be less angry and, you know, like, I don't know, if you played sports or something, they wanted you to be tough, but in every other aspect of life, they kind of want you to just kind of be a pushover, I don't know, and they want women to be just stronger and tougher and more resilient than ever. And like, to me, that seems
And that's probably linked to what we're talking about here, too. Yeah, I think so, too. So, who would have dreamed if I told you 20 years ago that men would be playing women's sports, showering in girls' locker rooms, and if you spoke out against it, you would be the problem. If I told you that 20 years ago, you said, that could never happen. That would never happen. But again, it talks about this exponential rise in this whole corruption that the vain world is engaged in. Now, make the point that although it's really bad in our day and time, this passage is not talking about 2024 America. This passage is talking about first century times, right? So I think sometimes we kind of get down, get discouraged, get depressed by imagining, oh man, this is worse than it's ever been before. Try to tell Noah that the world today is worse than the world he lived in. Try to imagine that homosexuality is worse where we live than it was in Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, so I think we always have to be a little bit careful to say, "Oh man, nobody's ever." We're in the worst of all possible times. We're in bad times. I'm not discounting that, but it's always been bad. And this passage is condemning practices of people in the first century. The Gentile world of the first century was here. This is what they were doing, right? Notice they receive in themselves that recompense of error which was meet. I have heard people use this expression to say, well, that's talking about AIDS, HIV, that's what God sent HIV, AIDS, as a punishment upon homosexuality. I don't think you can say that, right? Some people have tried to use this part of this, again, very explicit condemnation of homosexuality. But people have tried to use this expression to say it specifically as referencing the coming of HIV/AIDS. And I don't think you could say that. I don't think you can say that at all. Certainly there's a this world right now consequence of this kind of conduct. It includes lots of things. In our day and time, one of the consequences of this particular sin is HIV/AIDS. But there's always been consequence to living like this, right? Have you ever done any research about the mental health? I guess that's the way I would refer to the mental health of people who practice homosexuality. It's bad. I mean, this is not a happy lifestyle. In fact, there's a guy who wrote a book, 50 years ago probably, and I wish I could remember his name, Jay something or other. I read the book, but the title of the book was The Unhappy Gays. This lifestyle does not produce, fulfillment and satisfaction. It's a degrading lifestyle that ruins people's lives. People's lives are not enriched by living this way. And so I think that's, in the very general sense, that's what he's talking about when he says God, they receive in themselves that recompense. In other words, there's a result, there's a consequence. This leads to certain things, and those who practice this sin come to that realization. And it's not just AIDS, right? Wade?
Looking at who Paul's writing to wrong, this was a center of just the worst moral decay that you can see. I think if you look at it, it's sort of in the time, maybe in the time of Nero or right before or coming into that reign. And he was just as corrupt could be. And he practiced this whole gamut of things that Paul addressed to the Romans. They're talking about that. And, it just goes through that. Then going back to the concept of AIDS, we went through a period that says you got to listen to science. Well, back at the time when they discovered that, the science was abstinence and not practicing these things would get rid of it. But they didn't want to take that concept. They wanted to go, to a different road because that infringed on people's lifestyle.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right. Wade?
Back to what you were saying. Of course, my version says, committing shameful acts with other men receiving in their own persons the penalty appropriate to their perversion. And I'm just thinking about, like in my line of work, they try to get us to prescribe male hormones to females and female hormones to males. And I always wonder why you would want to do that, because I have a lot of men that come in and want testosterone because they feel so bad, because their testosterone is so low. But you think about it, if you take out the organs that make testosterone and then you start giving them female hormones, they're going to feel horrible because their DNA, you can't change your DNA. God has given you that, and your body craves that, and that's what makes you feel good. And so, what you're talking about here, this penalty, it could be, what you're doing to your own body, and how you got to feel awful.
So I agree. I think there are certainly physical and emotional consequences to living this way. There's just no doubt about it. JD?
Two things. The first thing, we were talking about the societal pressures. This was probably 10 years ago or better, but I had a boss that I worked for in accounting, and he and a partner had to go to Brazil to do some accounting work. And apparently Brazil has a version of Valentine's Day that's at a different time of year than ours is. So their hotel they were staying at had a restaurant, and so they came in one night after they'd been working at the place. So they just, went to the restaurant like they normally do, sitting together eating, and everybody in the restaurant's just staring at them like. So they asked the waiter, "Hey, what's going on?" And he said, this is Brazilian Valentine's Day. And so, everybody thought they were together.
Oh.
So, just everybody in the room just putting that societal pressure on them, so they got their meal to go.
So they weren't, down there it's not as accepted as it is here, apparently.
Correct. So they, but, then the second thing is it's amazing, and we may be getting to that, but the way people try to refute, these passages, you see everything from, well, this isn't directly what Jesus said, so this is just, the writer of Romans, that's just his opinion, so that's all that is. And
Oh,
then-
yeah, there
then
will
you hear
be.
other stuff that, oh, well, this is really just talking about monogamy. It's not about, homosexuality, it's about monogamy.
That argument is offered, that what the Word of God condemns is just promiscuity. That the Word of God does not condemn a monogamous, loving relationship between two men or two women. I'd like to see you try to force that into this text. This text says that there is that which is natural and there is that which is against nature. And it's not talking about whether it's polygamous or monogamous. It's not talking about promiscuity. It's talking about a specific sexual act. There is that which is natural. There is that which is against nature. This passage is talking about that which is against nature, and that there's a consequence. That's all we have to say is there's an extreme consequence for that. And then this last verse 28. Notice, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over. Do you see a sort of a trend here? God gave them up. God gave them up. God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. God let them go. God let them advance deeper and deeper into all of this corruption, all this moral corruption that was so indicative of their lifestyles. God let them do it. God could have stopped it. God could do anything he wants. God's a sovereign God, right? God could have struck them dead like he struck the people of Sodom and Gomorrah dead. He didn't choose to do that. He gave them up. He gave them over. He let them go deeper and deeper into these sins. Again, we don't want to be horribly graphic about it. This passage is graphic. But I would encourage us all to be ready. When someone says, why are you so against homosexuality? A good answer to that would just turn here to Romans chapter 1 and let them read that. God is against it. We're against it because God is against it. I'm going to tell you something. I'm against stealing too, because God is against stealing. I'm against lying because God is against lying, right? If we understand the Bible, we should be for everything God is for and against everything that God is against. And we're against homosexuality because God is against it and condemns it. But the reason why God condemns it is because he knows what's in man's best interest. It's always been true of God that when he established rules and guidelines, he did that for our good, right? He didn't do that just because he could. He didn't do that just to see how mean and overbearing he could be. God always has given his rules and instructions because he knows what's best for us. And this is not best for us. And God knows that. God made us. He knows what's in our best interest. And that's why he has given us the rules that he gave. Now, this sin of homosexuality wasn't the only sin of the Gentile world of the first century. And the rest of the chapter goes on to describe a whole catalog of sins they were engaged in. He gave a lot more detail about the specific sin of homosexuality, and it also mentioned idolatry. Idolatry and homosexuality strongly condemned in this text, but there's a bunch more. Let's read to the end of the chapter. Being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Well, again, there's a whole catalog of sins here. And And if you look up the definitions of each one, I don't know that we need to do that, but if you look up the definitions of each one, some of them seem to sort of overlap, and I suppose that's absolutely normal. All unrighteousness is just, they were full of unrighteousness. Unrighteousness is doing what's not right. And they were heavily, fully into doing what was not right. We know that fornication is a very broad term that involves all kinds of sexual immorality. Homosexuality would fit under the large umbrella of fornication. Bestiality would fit there. Adultery is a form of of fornication. Fornication is the broad term that sort of catches all kinds of sexual immorality. Wickedness, covetousness. This is a sin that we need to pay close attention to. We talk about that a lot. Maliciousness, full of envy, murder. Murder is horrible. Debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers. We probably could use a synonym for whisperers would be gossipers. Strong says the word means literally to make false and malicious statements about someone is a whisperer. Backbiters. Usually those who do the whispering typically do that behind somebody's back. I've always thought that was kind of a very fitting expression. They are backbiters. They'll stab you in the back. They won't approach you face to face, but they'll talk about you behind your back. They hate God. They're despiteful, proud boasters. Yeah, this is something. They invent evil things. As I was saying earlier, you keep going further and further into moral corruption. I've done everything. I think I've done everything that men have thought of. I'm going to come up with something new. I'm going to invent a new form of evil. And by the way, I think in our world today, because of the advancement of technology, people are inventing new ways to do evil, sadly. This is what always jumps off the page to me. Disobedient to parents. Is that amazing? Fornication, murder, haters of God, and disobedient to parents. One of the things we see whenever there's a catalog or listing of sins like this is that there are no degrees of sin. God doesn't see it that way. Now we do. We typically do. But understand, God sees all sins as that which can damn the soul to hell. And He's against them all. So in that list, that one, disobedient to parents, always just sort of jumps off the page to me. That's amazing that it's included with murderers and fornicators and haters of God, disobedient to parents. Without understanding, covenant breakers, they don't keep their word. This is a good expression, and this might be one that is helpful to us in dealing with the current trend of abortion. What's wrong with abortion? Well, abortion is taking a life, right? I mean, we absolutely believe life begins at conception, and an abortion is a murder. So that we already found that in this list, right? Murder would be a condemnation of abortion, but this expression also comes to play in the bigger discussion about abortion. There should be a natural affection that exists in lots of relationships, but specifically there should be a natural affection that exists from parent to child. It just should be natural. And a person who could abort a baby is lacking natural affection. Yeah, and that's one of the sins of the Gentile world of the first century, and certainly true of the world that we live in, that there's a lack of natural affection. You see an animal taking care of its offspring, and we've all seen it. I remember years ago watching our dog give birth to 6 puppies. And it was her first litter. She'd never done that before. She'd never seen that done before. She'd never gone to a class to learn how to do that before. But she knew how to do that. There was a natural bond of affection between our dog and her new puppies. I remember that very day or the next day, somebody came over to the house and they were looking at the puppies. Now, she would let me handle the puppies a little bit, but you could tell she didn't like it real well. She was kind of nervous until I put the puppy back. But this visitor came and he reached down to touch one of her puppies. She bit him on the hand. She'd never bitten anybody before, but she bit him on the hand because she did not want that stranger touching her puppy. Natural affection. The animal world manifests natural affection. But sadly, when we leave God, and when God lets us go, he's not going to stop us, he's going to let us go. When we leave God, he's going to let us go so far we don't even care for our own offspring. We're without natural affection. That's a powerful phrase right there, I think. Implacable means, again, I said there's some overlap here. We already talked about covenant breakers, but this word implacable, it means truce breaker. You make an agreement, you don't keep your agreement. Unmerciful. This is a thing we all need to work out, being merciful in our dealings with others. All right. Long list. We could spend lots of time talking about all the particulars. By the way, anybody have any question about any of those words that are in that long list, that catalog? All right. Verse 32. Who, knowing the judgment of God, that they which do such things are worthy of death. So the judgment of God is that they which do commit such things are worthy of death. They know this. They're aware of this. That they who do such things are worthy of death. How would they know that? So this is talking about the Gentile world of the first century. How would they know the judgment of God against such things? Any thoughts on that? Tom, thought? I think that's right. I think there's two things here. Part of it is just nature itself. Nature itself says that these things are not right. And that's in us, you know. It's in us to know that certain things are not right. To take a man's life, to murder somebody. I know that's not right. I may never even picked up a Bible, but I know it's wrong to take a man's life. There's something in us that God instilled in us, a basic instinct of morality. But also, as Tom said, and I think this is really true, the influence of God's dealings with humankind throughout the ages has always been there, right? Men have largely rejected it, but God has always been dealing with mankind. In the Old Testament, he dealt with the families through the patriarchs. Then when God gave the law of Moses to the Israelites, it's clear that God was still dealing with other peoples. Not, you know, our Old Testaments are pretty close directed history about God's dealings with the descendants of Abraham, the Israelites. But we get several snapshots there in the Old Testament that God was still dealing with other peoples too. You know, Jonah was sent to Nineveh. So the prophet Jonah was sent to the Assyrian Empire. They weren't Israelites. But it clear and they repented. Remember, it says they repented at the preaching of Jonah. So God still was dealing with other peoples. We have the sort of narrow history in our Old Testaments of God dealing with the Israelites. But God was dealing with people all through the ages. God has been dealing with people, and God and therefore anybody was certainly in a position to know. Now they'd rejected God. They even denied God. They looked at creation and said, there is no God. But they could have known and should have known the judgment of God against all this corruption and immorality. They which commit such things are worthy of death. But I think this is really key. So they do these things. They not only do these things, but they have pleasure in them that do them. Right? So they do these evil deeds themselves, and they take pleasure in enticing other people to engage in these things as well. I don't know about you, but this last expression, having pleasure in them that do them, I think that we need to do some self-reflection about that. So think about some horrible, immoral sins, and then think about how they are depicted in our media, movies, televisions, certainly on the internet. People engaging in all kinds of, on the internet, what is it? You name it, you can find it on the internet, right? They're doing stuff on the internet you can't even think about. The things you haven't even imagined yet, they're depicting that on the internet. Can I get on the internet and find that stuff? Of course I can, right? And I can be foolish enough to imagine that I have some degree of anonymity. I can go in the privacy of my own house, in a dark room at midnight, and I can get on the internet and I can view all that stuff, and I can take pleasure and satisfaction from looking at that stuff. Right? Would that not fit this phrase right here? Having pleasure in them that do them? Now, in my case, I don't do that stuff, but I sure take some entertainment value, some gratification from viewing others who are doing that stuff. I think this expression right here should go a long way in helping us be more disciplined about the things that we allow ourselves to see. TV, movies, the internet. We're being bombarded. Our young people are being bombarded, right? And this long list of sins, God hates all those sins, but he's also condemning those who take pleasure in those who do these sins. And I think that could very much fit our situation in our world today. We got to be careful, right? Thoughts or comments, anybody? Sarah? Yeah. You're talking about this phrase right here. So okay. So your point is this, and your translation. So this is in your translation is the lie. This is the definite article. This A is called an indefinite article. So in Sarah's translation, she says it uses the definite article, the lie. What would the lie be? Well, Sarah says you could link it all the way back to the lie in the Garden of Eden when Satan tempted Eve and she submitted to the temptation in the Garden of Eden. I think that would be fair. But that's the lie that has endured throughout time, is you can do this and there's no consequence. You can do this and God will not pay you back for it. Sarah? And there won't be any judgment, there won't be any consequence. I think that's a good point. I didn't know that, Sarah. I think that's interesting. So the King James uses the indefinite article. They turned the truth of God into a lie. But that it may be real helpful. I need to research that a little bit and see if that could be better translated. The lie, the big lie. This is the big lie. This is the lie that underlies everything else. Huh? The number one, the big one, the big lie is you can ignore God and get by with doing it. And men have always tried to live that way. All right, we're out of time. That's a good place to quit. We'll be ready to start into chapter 2 next week. Chapter 2, basically, so this chapter has been a condemnation of the Gentile world and all the sins they were engaged in. When he gets to chapter 2, he's going to talk to the Jews. Don't imagine that you're any better if you just because you're a Jew. And we'll talk about that starting next week, Lord willing.